my name's Kate Sandford and my quilt's called Just Keep Swimming. Is it safe to come out yet? So we had a very long lockdown where I didn't get to do much sewing at all. My daughter was deemed medically vulnerable and she had to stay indoors for 3 months off school. So we spent a lot of time indoors, and then she got ill and she had a very bad period of illness lasting about a year. Wasn't anything to do with COVID, but the COVID restrictions made everything much more difficult. Eventually, I managed to get her back off to school and sent her back out into the world, and I immediately needed a project to quilt. And luckily Nicholas Ball was doing the Shoal Sew Along, where he showed people on Instagram how to do the freehand curve fish. And I jumped on that because I didn't want to do, I can't follow patterns. I can't follow a printed pattern very easily. And I didn't want to do a completely made up new thing because I didn't have the mental bandwidth to do that. I needed to have some guidelines that I could follow and embellish on. So I used his inspiration of doing the freehand curves for the fish. So his original one's just one fish, and he kind of lays them all out in little rows. I think I got to like week 2 and I was like, oh, I could do something different with this. I could overlap them. So I did some overlapping fish and made them into like groups. I had a lot of blues left over from different projects. Blue's my favorite color. And I had the idea that I wanted to kind of have an ocean. I wanted it not to be flat. I wanted it to travel through the quilt. So I started putting the lighter blues at the top and then the darker ones at the bottom, and trying to piece it together so it didn't look blocky, and just kept moving things around. I have a design wall at home, and while my children are at home I couldn't sew because my husband was in my sewing room working. So he'd gone away for a bit, and I got my design wall back, so I was moving things around, and it just gave me like some space to put everything down mentally and just be creative. And get it back to me, really. It was really nice having a project. I think this is probably the fastest project I've done. I did it in like a month. I pieced the top in like a month. Took me about 6 months to quilt it and things. So this is my daughter here. You know, we were telling all our children to stay in, and we shouldn't be mixing people. And then she got ill, and we literally I had to drag her out the house to A&E, to the places, you know. At the beginning of COVID, we were all scared of going out, and I had to drag her to A&E. We were both in tears, and we didn't get out of hospital for a month. And then when it came time for her to go back to school, I was saying, you have to go back out, and she was very confused. So it's, looking back on the quilt, it's kind of like, you know, the little groups of people in their isolation, just wandering around, and they're all very grumpy. They've all got grumpy fish face on. They just kept swimming, because that was the thing from Finding Nemo. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. You just gotta keep going, and that's kind of how we got through it. We just kept going. Oh, and the bottom bit. So I had this little fish down here, but I didn't have the applique on it. So it's a raw edge applique, but it's all in one piece. So one Saturday I was like looking at it, and I was like, oh, I need something there. And I had this bit of I think it's a child's sheet or duvet cover or something that was like kind of bright red, and I just sat on the floor and I cut out the coral all in one go. and then stitched it on. And it just kind of gave it a bit more oomph. Well, I went to art school to do glass blowing, but you can't really do that in a domestic situation. So I needed a different creative outlet. And when I had children, I made a, typical quilt for my son, who's now 15. And then again with Molly, when she was born, she was a bit ill. And we went into hospital and somebody gave us a Linus quilt. And I was like, oh, actually, I did make a quilt. And I was looking at these quilts. I thought, I could make a quilt. And we were in and out of hospital quite a lot. And I couldn't really focus on reading a book, those dead hours. So I would take hand sewing in, and I would sew hexagons together. I think I started with a hexagon quilt. I had some Liberty fabric knocking around, and I sewed that together, and I thought that looked quite good. And every quilt I made, I could see my progression. I was getting better at it, and it was, quite cool. And every time I got a bit stale with it, there was a new technique I could learn. So, there's paper piecing and foundation piecing and freehand quilting, or, you can embroider things. There's never ending possibility in quilting. There's so many choices you can make. It's just an endless creative journey. And I haven't got to the end of the journey yet. It just keeps going. So I quilted in isolation for a really long time. And then I discovered people on Instagram, some of whom I have met this week, and we've been out for drinks. And it's really nice to not have to have the commitment of joining a group. You can cheer each other on from your sofa, and you can be involved in each other's creative choices. You can send each other pictures. What do you think of this? So that really, really opened doors. And eventually I did join an actual physical group, which I really love because it's a whole Sunday once a month.